success to most people was an outward thing. To me, success was becoming an internal thing about what made me happy, getting my children a good education, helping them differentiate themselves instead of just getting a job. Like, find that role, that you were meant to live.
Yes.
And as all of that was coming true, all of a sudden the aspects of time just started to unfold, and we had huge piles of research papers and books and library stuff, and just to get a real good idea. And we concluded at the time that time is the great equalizer.
Welcome to And Then I Did This. Prepare to be inspired as we celebrate the unique journeys of individuals who've had the courage to break free and live life on their own terms. Their lives prove that you truly can be free to live your best and most authentic life. Let's get to it. Welcome to the show. Today, I have a special guest, Richard Kiernicki. Richard is a disruptor, speaker, mentor, author of a triple award-winning book, The Capitalist's Worst Nightmare Come True, The Crucifixion of Capital, and creator of Time Equity. Can't wait to get into all of this. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ray. Thank you very much for having me back. It's great to see you.
So I am so curious to hear you talk about your journey and share where you started and how you got to this point, if you'll share some about that.
I've never been much of a person who accepted the conventional wisdom. I always questioned everything. And I think that in and of itself is probably one of the most powerful things that people can do for themselves, is to really tune in and listen to their heart, listen to their soul. Because we all have a gift, and that gift is buried in that vibration. So my start was very humble. I was a mechanic. I dropped out of high school. I learned people skills as a mechanic running my own garage. And I think that was kind of like what set me into the belief system where I'd be able to talk to anybody. If I could talk to them about their cars, I could talk to them about their money. So in 1981, I ventured off and got involved in the investment in the financial planning industry. And it was really interesting because my first year I worked for a captive agency, a captive company. And I didn't quite enjoy it, but I didn't have the knowledge as to why I didn't enjoy it. And it was always kind of like that product push. And shortly thereafter, about a year after I started there, I was acknowledged with a Rookie of the Year recognition, and I thought, wow, that's pretty great. I started talking to people and looking around, and I met a gentleman who was actually an independent financial advisor. And when I recognized the difference between the captive agent and the open book advisor, I could go anywhere, do business with almost anybody. It was a lot more lucrative to me. So that was great. That was 1982. And I got going in the business. I was having fun. I was mentored and started to meet some incredible people. Sir John Templeton. I don't know if you might probably remember that name. And many other different professionals in the industry. And I started to get really an amazing, let's just say, perspective on how the whole financial system worked. And then one day, after the 1987 market crash, a gentleman approached me and big eyes, big smile. Hi, Rick, how are you? What are you doing? And I recognized him immediately. And he said, what am I doing here? And I said, probably the same thing that you are, looking for a new client, looking for a new, like a car payment or a mortgage payment, whatever, make money, right?
Right.
And he said, well, let me ask you a question before we go any further. And I said, okay. And he said, Richard, how do you differentiate yourself from everybody in the business? And I mean, there's 3,500 financial planners in Toronto. Why should I do business with you? And I started to laugh. And he looked at me and he goes, Rick, this is the most serious question I ask people about this business. And you're laughing. And I said, well, yeah, Mike, if I knew how to differentiate myself, I probably wouldn't be standing here talking to you. And the next thing you know, right. I'm moving to a new company, and it was a fledgling. It was not a startup, but it was a company that wasn't growing. It was a $9 million asset management company. And basically we went from 9 million to 15 billion in about 12 and a half to 12 and a half or 13 years. And then I decided that it wasn't the place to be any longer. I was watching things happen. And what I mean by watching things happen, I was watching all these new advisors come and join us, and we expanded right across Canada, which was really exciting. And everybody knew who we were. The newspaper articles, the magazine articles, all of those different things were hitting us so hard, and we were growing and being recognized everywhere we went. So it was a tremendous amount of fun. But I realized that my partner didn't have a backup plan. And when we hit 13 billion, I decided that I was going to leave the industry. And when he asked me why I was leaving, and I told him that I was leaving because he didn't have a backup strategy, he said, well, what do you think I should do? And I said, the first thing you got to do is acknowledge the simplified prospectus, which states that past performance is no indicator of future results.
Right.
And he looked at me and I looked at him, and I was happy to pack up at 46 years of age and say that was an amazing 24-year career, and ended on a positive note in the sense of where I wanted it to end. So that was that part of my life.
Right.
And then on Saturday, October 18th, 2008, I read the Globe and Mail in Toronto and business section. And what does it say? It says, wanted, new financial order. And I started thinking, what's all that? And of course, the 2008 financial crisis had just started getting really some recognition, and some people were talking about some really scary things.
Right.
So I decided that I was going to take a look at what this was all about, given that I was taught buy low, sell high. And so when you have that behind you, you're like, well, wait a minute, the markets are dropping, things are crashing, and yet there's not enough advisors out there making sure their clients are making good decisions on the buy side.
Right.
So it was a very interesting point. Sitting there and listening to all of this, one thing hit me in the face was that the financial system needed to be rebuilt. And subsequently, I started thinking about, well, what can I do about that? And then all of a sudden, the answer of time just smacked me in the forehead, and it said, you're going to write a book on time. And I thought, okay. And that's what started a number of years. Well, it started initially like right away, but you know how authors are, I think, that you start your project, you stop your project, you get involved with something else. So it was unfolding since 2008. And it was a lot of fun. It really taught me aspects of things that I really didn't know and understand. As I got deeper into the subject matter of how the banks make money and how most people were afraid of losing their money, and the definitions of financial literacy and all of these things were so confusing for the majority of people, I decided that if I was going to stay in the industry, I was going to work as a mentor and coach because I had good grounding and good foundation. But I had also started to explore all of these other ideas. And those were the ones that really got me excited, was how to build a system that would eliminate crime and corruption and greed, manipulation, poverty, genocide, and war, because they're all basically financial conglomerates in one capacity or another. And I decided that just not what the intent of God was for me or anybody else to recognize my success by how much money I had or how much money I didn't have. So it was a really, really big eye opener at the time for me.
And that takes a lot to first listen to the voice that's telling you to write the book about time and money, and then to acknowledge it, because it's going so much against the grain of how everyone's programmed to think my bank account, my title, my position, my car that I drive, the name inside the tag that nobody can see of the suit that I'm wearing or the dress I've got on, that does not define you or your success or your level of success. I think it's fascinating, the whole thing. And we just can't wait to help spread the word. Talk more about your concept of the time equity equation and just the shifting to that away from what we've all grown up with.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to do that, because as a writer, I thought I'll launch the book digitally, sort of chapter by chapter as I'm writing it. And I thought that would be a great way, except for I ran into a brick wall at the end of 6 months. And I stopped and I looked at my partner, Signa, and I said, I think I'm missing something here. And it was just this kind of an awareness that started coming up, that I didn't have an answer for where I was going to take the book. And if you can appreciate fear, okay,
Right.
all of a sudden, here I am. I've released 5 chapters of my book, about to release the 6th, but had no idea what I was going to write for chapter 7, 8, and 9. My mind just kind of went back to that moment in time, which sparked everything again. And I started researching everything that I could find on the subject of time. And I started to look back at not only time in the last 100 years, but I looked at it in the context of as far back as anybody had written anything or conceptualized about anything about the entire, the miracle of time, right?
Right.
Yeah, I started to recognize that from my observations that success to most people was an outward thing. To me, success was becoming an internal thing about what made me happy, getting my children off to getting a good education, helping them differentiate themselves instead of, just getting a job. Like, find that role, okay, that you were meant to live.
Yes.
And as all of that was coming true, all of a sudden the aspects of time just started to unfold, and we had huge piles of research papers and books and library stuff, and just to get a real good idea. And we concluded at the time that time is the great equalizer. It is, from my perspective, when people started asking me about the book as I was going through it and writing it, I was telling them things like, to me, my time and your time are of equal value. Your time and my time are of equal value. Your time's not any more worth anything than is mine.
Right.
And then I started to get the feedback from that statement, because a lot of people, they do not agree with that concept. They're like, well, no, I went to school, to med school. I spent 10 years after I got out of high school, and I became this because I used the example actually as a surgeon in an operating theater. And the person who cleans the floors and cleans up the surgical instruments and does all of that stuff. And it came to me that if you looked at these two people, the question became, well, who's the most important person in the room? And it was the patient.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
how could the patient, in essence, have great surgery if the operating room wasn't cleaned to the standards that we have today? And then when I started to take a look at what did a doctor make in earnings, I thought, wait a minute, if I now take this magic, let's say $500 an hour number that the surgeon makes, he wouldn't be able to do anything unless he had all of those downline people at what, $20, $25 an hour?
Absolutely.
And it's crazy to think that if that surgeon woke up one day and nobody showed up with his appointment book and got the blood readings and things of that nature, he'd be standing there and at $500 an hour wouldn't know what to do.
Absolutely.
So these conversations really helped me build and start to really truly recognize what is the equality between human beings, whether we're great in the context of how we appear to the world, or whether we're great because of the way that we feel that we appear in the world. Being a mechanic and everything in between, I've watched people who absolutely, as an example, they had a particular job or a role, and some of them absolutely loved it. They would sing and they would do their thing and they were having fun, and it didn't make any difference what the job was. And yet there were all of these other people out there that were using it as a phenomenal ego trip. Well, I have this and I have that. And it was really a struggle to write the book, because one of the people that I actually sent a book to was a running candidate for the U.S. election that's coming up. And he had to know, okay, how do you define this time equity thing? How do we make it work? And it's at one level, it's kindergarten. It's simple. It's not complicated whatsoever. And yet at another level, that ego that people have that thinks that makes them better than somebody else because of what they do or how they're labeled, or like you said, the business card.
Right.
It's not realistic.
No.
because the people that some refer to as the have-nots, they want to have what the haves have.
Right.
And
Right.
they now
Oh.
define success as the
Oh.
material stuff, right? The clocks, the cars, the homes, the vacations, all
Right.
of the things that go along with making more money than somebody else. And
Right.
really, at the end of the day, I didn't think that my maker's intent for this incredible paradise that we're killing,
Right.
this is my home.
Right.
And I've got to do
Absolutely.
everything that I can to protect it, because all of these other people are chasing that dream, chasing that material thing. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I read something the other day that said, for the money that these guys have, they could actually, change the world from the perspective of poverty, war, genocide, things of that nature. The
Absolutely.
question asks, the most important thing really is, who are you when you have all that money, but you're putting it to, I'll call it errored thinking, as in an error. I don't
Right.
want to say evil or,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I want to say errored because we can solve that problem.
Yeah.
And I think
Exactly.
inherently, I think when we look at the word evil, I think it implies a certain level of completeness. Whereas I think error offers an opportunity for chance for people to try something again and to make their lives work. And hopefully that's where, with me and people like yourself who are introducing us to the world so that
Right.
they could find something to support.
Absolutely.
Maybe they don't stand for anything. I
Absolutely.
read your note, from May 16th, 2016, about money can't buy love or happiness. And some people will debate that, right? But it all really depends on how many zeros are to the left of the decimal point.
Right.
So now we can have fun and we can work with integrity, because when you think about a world that would not have money in it at all, not whatsoever, not a trinket, not a dollar, not a Bitcoin, not a cryptocurrency, nothing other than the time. And now technology has stepped into a place whereby, as an example, we have blockchain.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
blockchain was established to monitor transactions. Then why wouldn't blockchain be able to monitor just as efficiently time? So you go to work, you clock in or you log in with your cell phone or some other device. I'm there and I work my hours and I leave there, and then I go home, and on my way home, I decide to get a chicken for my family and a bottle of wine. And, I need a new pair of socks. And you can go and do all of these things based on people's equality of doing everything that other people do. And it just started to sound, the more I got into it, the more ridiculous it continued, to the Forbes richest 1 billion people. Like, wow. I mean, that's great. But I'm sure that God didn't intend to cut all the trees down to stack up all those billions of dollars.
No. And I saw a visual once that I never forgot. And it was a person on a bicycle and a person in a Ferrari. And they're both at a stoplight waiting for the light to change. And the heading was, both of their graves are the same size. Everything is relative in how, as you were saying, how people define themselves. And even I went through that recently. I say recently, it's now almost 10 years ago when I left my ad agency role in New York City. I was working with some of the world's biggest brands. I technically was one of Google's biggest customers. At the point that I walked out of that role and stepped out, there was a mental mind shift, because it's definitely like I'll say programming again. It's like we get into roles where we have a certain title and people look at us a certain way. I remember someone I was mentoring at the time, when I told them I'm going to be leaving, and they looked at me and said, "Why? You're at the pinnacle. You're doing what many of us are striving to get to your role." And I said, "And you can have it." And like I said, I'm ready to jump. Like, I'm at the pinnacle, but I'm so not happy. It wasn't fulfilling. The money was being spent to buy things to distract myself, whatever. I just knew I couldn't do it anymore. But the point is the title and what you wind up, the further you go up the chain, the bonuses and perks and things that come with it becomes a golden handcuff. But when you walk away, none of that is who you are. That executive savings plan and the Amex cards, and none of that is who you are. So you have to redefine, who are you and who am I and what is important to me. I knew that I was destined to make that transition. I started waking up in like 2007 and then became a life coach, a certified coach when I was in New York. You learn ways of going within, and part of it is just shutting out the noise of everything outside that's tricking us. I think that's part of my love-hate relationship with advertising, because for years I thought it was fun and I was filming commercials in Hollywood and winning awards. Then at the end of the day, it's like, what really does that matter? Did I help a child that's hungry somewhere? Did I help somebody who doesn't have a place to sleep tonight? Whatever we can do to help one another. So I'm curious. I'm so aware, and I'm very conscious, and this can be a polarizing topic, of the tracking of our behavior. There's a new book that a woman, she's a Harvard grad, that wrote about, which doesn't matter that she's a Harvard grad, a woman who wrote a book about data as the new capitalism, because that is what is defining our future. The more the biometric tracking, they can, if it's somebody can chip someone to know exactly where they are doing whatever they're doing at any given time, we've just completely lost all sense of autonomy. In my humble opinion, But I love the moving away from money being the focal point, and more, what is everyone contributing to trade this for that versus it just being money driven.
Yeah. It reminds me of a post that you made recently where I suggested that before we can do anything, the most important thing that we can do is to listen to ourselves.
Absolutely.
And when we can't listen to ourselves in the first place, then we can't really hear other people speaking.
Absolutely.
And hence, I was blessed again with an answer that taught me for myself, how to really listen to what's going on inside my head or my heart.
Right.
And identify and say, well, wait a minute, there's a thought that I don't like. And before I speak it, I can reject it.
Absolutely.
And when we become into that sensitivity of our own ability to listen to ourselves,
right,
then the relationship that we have with others becomes incredible, because I've learned that true deep listening is the highest compliment that you can pay another individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah, many a time I speak with people and I'll say something and they'll look at me and they'll go, how did you remember that? That's,
right.
10 years ago or whatever. And it's just very simply, well, I'm interested in what you have to say.
Right.
And besides, if I listen to just my mind while you're talking, I'm going to be distracted in my own fantasy world, but I'm not going to be paying attention to yours.
Right. I'm curious about your thoughts around, are you rallying other people? How are you rallying other people to help you fan the flame, besides me, but fan the flames and get other people on board? Are there things that listeners who might want to engage in some way, what are your plans around that to help get the word out and help it become more of a reality?
Thanks. And that, honestly, Lou Ray, that's the most difficult thing now. 4 years after the book it was launched, it was kind of like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if the book took off?
Right.
And what I've recognized is that a lot of social media platforms, and in fact, a lot of people on those platforms, they're not open-minded to new ways of thinking. They just want to stick with the old. So the first objection is largely from academia that says, you're an idiot. Like, we can't do that. That's not going to happen. And I'm like, well, take your head out of your butt
Right.
and realize that the sun does shine, okay, and that at some level, someday, humanity really is going to wake up and they're either going to be pleased with what they've accomplished in their time or they're not going to be pleased. The toughest part is finding those people who immediately say, yes, I want to be a part of it. And that part of it's growing. I've won, as you mentioned earlier in the introduction, I've won a number of different acknowledgments and awards for my book. I've been talked about as a thought breaker, a real visionary, because I'm not talking about something that somebody else is talking about. And it's interesting because then I meet other people who, over the course of this journey, I've met a number of people who are trying similar things, but they're still, pardon the expression, they're still bastardizing it with cryptocurrency or some other kind of a monetary thing. So it's not a pure driven. And then people will say, well, how can we do that all in a very short period of time? And I'm like, well, I've got the answer for that as well. People are like, well, are you aware of what you're asking people potentially to do? And yes, I'm fully aware. So getting those like-minded people together is happening. It's happening slowly. I need 273 million people to make up the 3.5% of the population that could enact such a significant change.
Right.
But at one level, it's such an infinitesimally small number that I can't think sometimes if I was free access and had access and people caught on to my work and said, yeah, this is the way the world's going to go forward.
Right.
And I think if people sat down and actually really gave it a thought and actually were able to concentrate long enough to truly understand, then all of a sudden it would take such a load off the pressure that we find ourselves in. And it's incredible. But if we had a system whereby we could simply trust one another.
Novel concept.
Exactly.
Right.
So if I look at in the big picture sense, I can honestly say that time can't be bastardized. Time is fully transparent, not like any of our other financial systems that just aren't transparent. If we had those two components, then we could rebuild trust. And when people start to trust each other again, they can equalize with each other and be empathetic towards each other. And then all of a sudden, when you have people that are rebuilding their trust and talking about, hey, we're all equal at the end of the day, and we start to accept that analogy that empowers us even further, then we're going to end up recreating a stronger democracy because we're not going to have things like lobbying and buying your way into government favor. And the government is going to have to step into, and big business is going to have to step into integrity. One of the biggest farces in capitalism is something called planned obsolescence. So I use the example of a stove, and let's say in North America, there's 400 million people, and every year we need to make 4 million stoves. So the guy on the assembly line is working as fast as he can to build a stove after a stove after a stove. And yet it lasts 5 years. There's no pride in that. But if we stepped back and said, well, now we're going to build a great stove that'll last for 10 or 15 years. But the offset to that would be that person on the assembly line only has to build one stove a day.
Absolutely.
And then they have time to go out and enjoy the efforts of the work that they do. They can have piano lessons. They can have music, they can play sports, they can coach and mentor teams, finding the beautiful ways to change our world in the context of, look at some of these people that are telling us that we're going to be eating bugs at some point in time. I'm really not in favor, but if you'd like to show me how you're going to do that, I might watch. There are just so many things that I've looked back at now since I started putting this together in 2008. And my eyes are wide open and I see what's going on. And it's going to be people like us who want to share a message that benefits everybody, that helps everybody attain their vision, their goals, and the things that they want to accomplish. And to me, at the end of the day, if that's what we end up doing what we love. I've heard all sorts of performers and other people who would say, I don't need money for my work. I love it so much. It's just playtime. So why can't we all adapt to that principle, that philosophy of life, and find our gift. As we look for it, more things will become apparent. And then, of course, you look at Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek, and he says to a question, well, how much did it cost to build this spaceship? And he turns and he says something along the lines of, well, it didn't cost anything because we've eliminated the utilization of money because we found it was a deterrent to being able to achieve our maximum selves, our maximum potentials.
Oh, wow.
And when you think about that, right, as I may have mentioned earlier on, when we start thinking about this and we ask ourselves, well, who are we? What are we? And what are we going to be remembered for? It's not going to be the money.
No, absolutely.
It's not going to be the money.
And I think the collision course we're on with money right now, from everything from the deficit, by the time some people listen to this, the collapse may have occurred. I mean, BRICS nations, just all of this focus around to all the things you said earlier around corruption around money and just how it becomes a focal point, yet it's meaningless. I mean, it's paper, yet we've given it meaning. It's digits and zeros with a decimal point on a computer screen that can be wiped out in a matter of seconds or made to look, wow, like that's so much money. Well, like the previous article I wrote, money doesn't buy happiness. It can help a lot of things. What I'm hearing and seeing in you is a light switch came on, and the things that just don't make sense for the way we are conducting ourselves as a human race. We're the only creatures on the planet that use a form of monetary currency to live. Like squirrels and birds and bears and every other creature, they just are. I remind myself and others frequently that this is a monopoly game. Like we've all agreed to play the game. And I even say that to a good friend of mine in New York that, was like, oh, this thing is happening and, oh, they're going to overturn that. And I said, it is all a clown show. Think of it like a movie. All of these events happening around us are like one big movie, and don't buy into it. Do not enter the theater. Do not get the ticket. Stay in tune with yourself. Go out in nature. Turn off the social media. I got rid of my television in 2018 when I moved to California, originally to LA, got rid of it and still don't have one and don't want one. You couldn't make me buy another television. It's all about choice. I believe in, and I think that people like you and I, we are helping, as there are others out there too. We just need to give a voice. We are creating the new world and the new earth that we all want to be part of. Because this old paradigm that we've all endured, that the light switch has come on for many, it's like we're now awake and we're not going back to sleep. We're going to continue on our path, and some of the things we're beginning and the next generations will carry it forward. I think it's fabulous. I think it's awesome. I want to make sure people know how to get your book. I'm linking it below, but I don't know if you want to touch on that a bit, that you have a digital copy.
Yes, please. I'm giving it all away. I certainly would not want to be a hypocrite and sell my digital book. So the reality is, yes, if you go to Richard M. Kiernicki, you can see my name on the bottom of the picture, and just put .com and /author, and that will take you to my website. And you can go to the top right corner of my website where it says, get a book, and put your email in. You'll get a book immediately or almost immediately. And if you don't want to be a part of the mailing list, don't worry. Take your name off after you receive the book, but share it with your friends. Have discussions. There's discussion groups growing all over the place. That one of the beautiful things that is unfolding from this, we're looking for university professors and other academics and scholars in areas that, as an example, are talking about the PhDs in finance and the MBAs in finance and business. But we're also looking at attracting psychology, psychiatrists, sociologists, political science students, and get them to come in and join and actually create a PhD program in time equity, so that it could become a foundation for distribution through the education system.
Absolutely.
So there's all sorts of things that we're trying. People can get together and start talking, because it's going to start with one person, me.
Yes.
And then it's going to continue to grow. And the question becomes how rapidly, if we're, let's just say, motivated by fear into the option that we have that's also fighting for space at this point in time. There's a group of individuals that are trying to run, I'll say, the world in a particular way that the rest of us might not agree with.
Right.
But if we don't stand up and push back, then they're going to shove their agenda down our throat and it'll be too late. If we can get people involved in discussion groups, my objective is to set up a global platform where people can come and talk about it and share, talk about experiences of where this thing is starting to happen, like in real life, in real time. And as all of this starts to unfold and we get to that 300 million people that can say, yeah, we're going to be a part of this. We want to be a part of where this is going to go. And they're going to sit back and they will make that change.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, and I hope that it's a peaceful change.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to set it up on a global basis that people can send it to their ministers, their elected officials, other groups and members, so that people start to really get an idea of what we're doing, what the integrity is behind this. And ultimately, at the end of the day, work for a world that we can all be proud of, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are always talking about different races and all of these different things. All I can say is one thing, is that we all bleed red.
Yep, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
If that creates that equality and supports that equality from the inside and as well as the outside, we can win this. We can make our planet our home and save it from the atrocities that we are doing here to our home.
Yeah, so I would say 2024 is the year of transparency. Things are just still being exposed, and the more things come out of the dark, the things are coming into the light. And once there's light, once you turn a flashlight on, the room isn't dark anymore. So you can see the things that were hiding in the corners. They might survive for a little bit, but they're not going to last for long because they're not comfortable being exposed. So cheers to you. I'm all about what you're doing. I will put the link to the book in the show notes below. And thank you so much for sharing your vision and for taking the time to create it. It just takes a spark to start a flame. So this has definitely been enlightening and interesting. And thank you so much.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you so much for your kind gift of time and giving me an opportunity to share some of my ideas on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a wrap on another episode of And Then I Did This, celebrating the lives of those who've walked away from the beaten path to pursue work and a life that nourishes their soul. If you're feeling inspired and ready to explore your own path to freedom, check out youcanbefree.life, where you'll find resources and support to help you break free and live life on your own terms. See you next time.